Welcome to the first edition of the Wednesday the Center Online. Thank you very much to the working groups that we are going to feature today. Before we start the program, I would like to say first of all, thank you to everybody who has been involved in preparing this event. And Nancy Robbins will introduce the 5 groups. And then after that, each group will give a presentation. And then after all the 5 presentations, I will ask questions to the different panelists, and I will get questions through the chat room. So all type of questions should be sent to the chat room, and then I will collect them and ask them at the end of the 5 presentations. So thank you very much again. And Nancy, would you like to start introducing the 5 groups? And hopefully this will be a good way to end this year, which is of course different from other years in terms of the ending. We are all working remotely, but it's also an opportunity for the graduate students who are involved in this group to keep working with other students, and hopefully they will continue to do this throughout the summer, and we look forward to see them again next year. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you for tuning in today, wherever you're viewing this from. Today we're showcasing the 2019-2020 Graduate Working Groups on Global Issues programming. Originally, this series started with the Ford Foundation grant in the mid-1990s. The Graduate Working Groups on Global Issues have been part of regular programming at the Center for International and Global Studies for more than 2 decades. During that time, we have supported over 100 of these interdisciplinary topical working groups, which are run entirely by the graduate students. They function as a forum for discussing broad global topics of interest to their members, and equally important, they provide a place for graduate students to share their individual research for purposes of getting feedback from a number of different disciplines and perspectives. In collaboration with the Center for International and Global Studies, some of the working groups were co-sponsored this year by the Africa Initiative, the Asian American Studies Program, and Global Asia Initiative. We collectively were pleased to support 14 working groups, of which 5 are sharing with us today. They're going to tell us what what their groups have been doing over the past 6 months of this academic year. I'm not real good with technology, but I'm going to just read through my list of speakers. We have 5 groups represented, 6 speakers. The first you'll see is Felipe Montano Campos, who is from Buenos Aires, Argentina. He's from Economics and Computer Science and is graduating this year, fingers crossed. Laura Mkumba is from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. She is working on a Master's of Science in the Duke Global Health Institute, and she also is finishing up her degree this May. Andrea Koris is from Boston, Massachusetts, USA, another Master of Science student, Duke Global Health Institute, and she's graduating in May 2020. Alex Mkumba is from Ponca City, Oklahoma. He's a civil and engineering and environmental engineering student, PhD program in the Pratt School of Engineering, and he is hoping to finish off his degree in the spring of 2021, as he said, pending global pandemic timeline. Claire Lebarbenchon is from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. She's getting joint PhDs in public policy and sociology, and hopes to graduate in 2022. And finally, Jack, forgive me, I didn't ask the pronunciation of this, but Aynan is from Naples, Florida, Masters of Environmental Management in the Nicholas School, and he hopes to graduate a year from now in 2021. That's it for me. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to the speakers. I think the first speaker is Felipe Montano Campos.
Okay, thank you very much, Nancy. I'm just gonna share my screen. Sure. Okay, well, thank you very much. My name is Felipe. I am a member of the Corruption in Developing Countries group. What I'm gonna tell you today, I'm gonna tell you like what we have been discussing like during the last 6 months in our group. Let me introduce very quickly the members of my group. We have a very diverse group from social science. This was helpful because we had like feedback from different points of views within social science. We had like people from public policy, Huyendu Jevsky from economics and computer science, myself, Sungru. I'm from political science. We had Mkumba, Diego Romero, Microbiome, and Su Jungyu. I'm going to discuss about 3 topics that we really like and think are very important. The first one is the relation about social media and corruption. We all know that with the improvement in technology, social media has become a part of our lives, right? And several studies have shown that social media is the main source of information for individuals. We discussed the paper Social Media and Corruption, and the key question was, does social media promote accountability in authoritarian context where traditional media may be suppressed? This was a paper that was written in Russia, and they found that social media could help the population to identify corruption in governments and discipline corruption even in a country with limited like political competition, right? The discussion that we had was focused on how social media impacts corruption in developing countries, and we got the 2 main following conclusions are that social media is a great tool to spread information even in developing countries. So it's also useful to identify corruption hotspots. However, we need to be very careful. As many of us know, social media is also a place where the spread of fake news takes place in high proportions, since the cost of spreading information is 0. So we really believe that there is an important research area on the trade-offs that exist when the information spread cost is 0, like in social media, for instance. What we mean here is that we might be able to identify corruption hotspots, but we also could be like misinformed. Okay, the second topic, it's about like intergenerational persistence of corruption. Basically, the key question is, what is the role of attitudes in corruption? And the argument is that there's like a lot of empirical evidence that attitudes towards corruption persist within families through generational change, right? We discussed what is the situation in developing countries. Since we all know that individuals' human capital comes in a great portion from the household and school. And when I say from the household, I mean parents. And when I say from school, I mean education outside the household. We discussed like how the lack of a good education system in developing countries make more difficult to revert the situation of intergenerational persistence of corruption. And we really believe that investments on education will not only have a great effect on the future income of the people in developing countries, but it could also like help people to be less corrupt. Okay, so the third point, the third topic is we discuss if whether or not the mainstream theoretical approach on corruption fits in the developing countries. Basically, the theoretical approach found that the main problem is that citizens with high social value for a public good may have low private valuations or have low ability to pay for the good, right? So basically, this is an inefficient result since it derives in red tape behavior. And what's a red tape behavior? For example, when bureaucrats can set up a very annoying and long process for obtaining driver's license, so people who are poor or have low willingness to pay will not be able to bribe the bureaucrats to get the license, right? But on the other hand, people who are richer or need the license the most will bribe the bureaucrats to skip the process, right? So we discussed like real life cases of red tapes in developing countries, and we conclude that this is really a big problem since it distorts the economy and encourages bureaucrats to involve in corruption, And it's easier to get into these kind of behaviors in developing countries because like the institutions are weaker, right? Finally, I would like to discuss about our guest speaker that we had, Professor Evan Modesti from Political Science. I just want to mention a couple of points we got from our discussion with the professor. We discussed about his paper about international corruption treaties and local enforcement in Vietnam. We also talked a little bit about the efficacy of international corruption regimes, as well as some methodological insights about his paper. The discussion gave us new ideas to try to merge what's happening at the international and the national level in terms of corruption. And the main insight is that the implementation matters and international regimes need to have some sort of mechanism to make countries comply. Thank you very much. This was my presentation.
Thank you, Felipe. This was a wonderful presentation, and congratulations to the group for this very important work. And we can talk more about after the other presentations, but it's certainly an area that where development should focus on, and especially when you talk about institutions, the role of the institution, especially in fighting corruption, is crucial both at the domestic, national level and international level. But again, we can talk more about this in the QA time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next is Laura, I think. Hi, Laura.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm actually going to have my partner, Andrea, start us off in introducing our group, and then I will come back and talk about one of our main events.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Andrea, Koris. My colleague, Laura Mkumba, as well as our colleague, Yadushini Ravidran. The three of us are master's students in global health. And I want to talk a little bit about the kind of antecedents of our group before Laura jumps into the main event, which we organized this year. So the three of us started off our first year of graduate school and began a conversation with some other classmates of ours around the existence of issues of justice, issues of historical trends of colonization baked into the development process. The three of us found ourselves quite at odds with some of the institutional conversations at Duke and in general in the other global health arenas that we had worked in, finding that there was a real paucity of radical conversation around how particular colonial trends are not only baked into the development process from funding to implementation, but are often furthered and reified through training institutions like ours. So we really wanted to start a student conversation and build space in our small institution at Duke, the Duke Global Health Institute, to create an arena in which students and professors and faculty could discuss the histories of colonization, how those affect contemporary global health work, and kind of creating space to imagine a more equitable and just system as we are training the leaders and individuals who will be furnishing this system moving forward, both as clinicians, researchers, practitioners, project managers, whatever it may be. And I think for many of us here who have worked in some capacity in the development sector, this is probably a pretty relevant conversation. So we began by running a Think Global, which is a speaker series within our institute that highlights the work of one speaker. We invited Dr. Tejan C. From UNC, who spoke about the socioeconomic histories of colonization from the perspective of her PhD work. But what that talk really served to do was create the first space in which we were able to discuss these types of topics within the Global Health Institute. That kind of laid the groundwork for a broader much more involved event, which Laura will talk about, the conference we organized in January. So Laura, I'll hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. So as Andrea mentioned, so after the Think Global, we had a focus group with first and second year students in our department. And from that focus group, we wrote a list of recommendations that we shared with the administration and the education team at the Duke Global Health Institute. And then after that, we organized a conference on January 31st of 2020. So we invited over 7 speakers from around the world and from different institutions. And this was in collaboration with the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Global Health Histories. And the conference had over 750 online and in-person attendees. And I'm gonna share my screen just to show you guys our conference website. There we go. So this was the website that we created for the conference, and we were using this to share information with potential attendees about our conference, the mission of our conference, and also to share more about our working group. So I'll take a moment to highlight other members of our working group. So you see myself, Laura, and Andrea in this presentation. In the middle here, we have Yadashini Ravindan, and then we have 2 other members of our working group, Ali Murad and Cordelia Kenny. And so these Ali and Cordelia are first year students who will continue this work next year after Yadu, Andrea, and I graduate. But from the conference, the main takeaway that we had is we had different perspectives from different fields in global health, from practitioners, from physicians, people in the humanities. And the main, one of the main topics that came away was a lot of the methods in the way that we talk about global health are still rooted in colonial mindsets, and oftentimes we don't acknowledge this in our practice. And so, for example, one of the speakers, Dr. Madhuka Pai, brought up a point using data where he showed that even though, you know, malaria is a disease that happens in a lot of, it's in the most prevalent sub-Saharan Africa, and that's where it's most, those communities are most affected. However, all malaria conferences are held in North America and Europe. So they're not held in the spaces where this disease is most prevalent. And also the people who would be the most, who are experts in this disease would not even be able to attend the conference due to structural barriers such as, you know, visas and just immigration and things like that. So those are just some of the topics that we talked about. And from this, we are hoping to continue having this discussion, particularly in context of COVID-19, and especially thinking about how using this window of this pandemic to really rethink and reimagine how global health can function. So before I end, I'll just show you quickly other aspects of our website. So this is the link, and I'm happy to share it after this talk. But you can actually, if you go to our tab for live streaming an event, if you click on this link, you can actually view the recording of the conference if you weren't able to attend in person. And in addition, if you want to read more about decolonizing global health, we have a list of resources, or we have some selected sources, some from our speakers from our conference, but others just quick, you know, reads to get an introduction to what decolonizing global health means and how people have talked about it in other spaces. But yes, thank you much for this opportunity, and thank you so much for your support this year.
Thank you, Laura, and Andrea, and the other members of the group. I would say certainly your topic was already very relevant before, and now because of the COVID-19 crisis is even more hot in the sense of discussion around the world. I know that the conference was very successful, and congratulations for that. And I think we should also make sure that we stay in touch over the summer, because we are organizing events related to health diplomacy connected to the COVID-19 crisis that will be of interest to your group, and hopefully we can collaborate also in organizing some of these upcoming events. Anyway, we'll be in touch about that. So now we turn to Alex.
Can everyone see my screen fine? All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Alex. I'm the student representative for GERM, or Graduates Engineering and Researching Microbiomes. Just a brief introduction about me is, well, first, my name. As Nancy said, I'm an environmental engineering PhD student. My own research revolves around identifying beneficial bacteria that live within your lungs that may help with lessen effects of respiratory viruses, specifically influenza A. And I've been leading the GERM group for the last 3 years. And so you're probably wondering, what is the microbiome? And a definition for that I really like is the total of all the microorganisms in a particular environment. You're probably still wondering, but like, what does that actually mean? And so just to kind of give you a brief overview of how we do this is you can take samples. Let's say from this slide, we're looking at global maritime shipping trends, how they might be transporting bacteria in this ballast water from port to port around the world, spreading cholera. You can take a human health sample, a swab, or maybe even looking at soil, trying to introduce these microbial communities that support better crop yields. And so you take one of these samples, we can isolate all of the DNA out of that sample. We can then sequence it, all those A's, T's, G's, and C's, and then determine, okay, what does this match up to? What microbes are we seeing? Instead of growing just single isolates or single bacteria, we can actually tell what are all the bacteria in this community that's here. And so that's what we do. We do a lot of microbiome research. This has been going on. It's a field that's emerged within the last 10 years. And as you can imagine, it is quite multidisciplinary. And so our participants come from a wide range of programs, a couple of the engineering, biomedical, environmental, we have medicine, biology, and then we even, because the data type doesn't really, it isn't able to be analyzed using those traditional statistical tools. There's a lot of research going into methods of how can we better analyze this and come to better conclusions. And so we get a lot of people from computational biology and biostatistics as well. And so GERM serves as a place that we can have this multidisciplinary group that we come together, we share ideas and methods to enhance the understanding and quality of microbiome research here at Duke. And so we do that through having some method sharing presentations. We do research presentations, giving each other feedback. One of the key things that we really enjoy is having visiting speakers. And so there's a lot of industries popping up, a lot of startups in the Triangle area alone, where we've hosted visiting speakers from companies like Becton Dickinson and then AgBiome, and then just this year. And then we've also had academic speakers, some from NCA&T, Duke. There's a lot from these various fields. We have people's mentors come in and speak to us. And then a really fun one that we had this year that I like to nerd out about is Ben Callahan from NC State. And he created one of the premier analysis pipelines for microbiome research. And so he was a really great person to have coming in this year. And then we've also, now that GERM has been around for 4 or 5 years, we are now having former students come in and kind of talk to those GERM members or people that might be interested. And so how does DUCIGS enhance GERM? And so you can see from this slide, we have some of our meeting pictures. And I think this arm belongs to someone from BASF. And I just finished reading Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point. And so we use this funding to kind of provide one of those stickiness factors. How do we move group participation from only 4 or 5 people showing up to 20, maybe 25? And if you're working with graduate students, that thing is food. And so when we provide food, free lunch, things like pizza, our participation really increases. And so through that, we are able to get better attendance for when we have these visiting speakers come. And also the way that we use the food is really interesting. Instead of providing it during the meeting, we wait until after the speaker is finished speaking. And then that way, you know, the students stay around, the speaker stays around. We allow that food to just kind of sit there and then make people more hungry so that they will stick around. And then it furthers discussion and better one-on-one after the speaker is finished. And so for that, we also obviously want to say thank you to the Center for International and Global Studies. And, you know, group participation wouldn't be what it is without your funding.
Thank you, Alex. And again, thank you for all your work and your group's work. I think, yes, there is food for thought. In your case, pizza is always a good attraction. So I'm glad that we are helping in that sense. But I also think that we will talk about later, but I'm curious to know whether the COVID-19 crisis is going to attract even more attention to your group's research, given the fact that you deal with a particular type of with lungs, and so given the type of impact that COVID-19 has on our health, whether you already got inquiries about that, but we can talk about that later. So now we move to Claire.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Claire. I'm from the Informed Choices for Equitable Development group. I'm a PhD student jointly based in public policy with the sociology department. So just as kind of an overview of what INCHT does, we started in October 2015, so we've been going for a while now. And our longevity is definitely thanks to the Duke University Center for International and Global Studies. We've been funded by them for several years, and it's allowed us to, like the past group, increase our attendance and get people really excited about the development work we do. The basic premise of the group is to foster discussion about international development and inequality more specifically from an interdisciplinary perspective. And I'll show in a second, we do draw from different disciplines and different departments, allow students to have interdisciplinary feedback on their work. We meet weekly, and each discussion is led by one or two group members. And most recently, it's been mostly students presenting their work and kind of workshopping it and getting feedback. So we do draw from multiple departments at Duke. A whole bunch of us are from the public policy PhD program, and this is divided into different tracks. So even within public policy, we do get a nice interdisciplinary perspective. We also have a number of students from the UPEP program in environmental policy, both in political science and economics, and also some showings from political science and economics departments. So we're trying to address this kind of gap that we saw in discussions about international development, which are looking more specifically at the distributional impacts and really looking at context-specific reactions to development policy and how we can implement development policy to address inequality in the developing world. So what we do is essentially discuss and kind of push research forward, especially student research, forward towards examining development from a context-specific perspective. A lot of the work that we do is based in developing countries or on specific countries, and we've put a lot of emphasis in our student work on addressing the context in developing countries and how that can push policy forward. But not only that, we also kind of flip that and look at how policy in developing countries is having impacts on local populations. And so we try to foster a really inclusive, friendly environment for students to share their work and to get some feedback from the group on what they're working on. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So the meetings are about an hour long, and we have students working on a ton of different themes and really bringing their own interdisciplinary background to the discussion of each paper. So we have students working on global health, corruption, water access, migration, environmental causes and consequences, and social mobility. So now I'll go into more specific papers. So this is just a sample of the work that students in our group have showcased this year. So for example, on the global health side, Kelly Hunter presented her work on downstream effects of cervical cancer screening in rural and Western Kenya. And this was a really interesting kind of day for us because Kelly was about to go into the field and she was designing a follow-up to a randomized controlled trial that had been implemented by Duke Global Health Institute. And so we were able to kind of workshop her field work and her questionnaire, also her methods and stuff like that in the field. And I think it was a really nice showing of how we all came together with different knowledge of how to work on these issues. Also, Marcella this semester presented Deportations and Violence, Evidence from El Salvador, work on this forced return migration from the US to El Salvador. It's been happening recently in the US, a really important topic. Another student presented Career Ladders and Upward Mobility, and this was looking at students in India in some of the top schools and how that might affect their upward or downward mobility in different cases. Another student presented Kinship, the State, and State Legitimacy. And this was an interesting paper because it was a theoretical paper by a student member that we have from Uganda to understand how ethnicity and how ethnic history in the country helped shape our understanding of the state today. And it was a really nice discussion about how this theoretical framework can really shape our understanding of research and development. Lastly, we have flash talks each semester where basically students come and just talk a little bit about what they're working on and workshop really quickly, get some immediate feedback on questions and stuff like that. And we ended up having a really nice discussion last semester about how to come up with a research question in international development. And so some of the earlier year students don't necessarily have papers yet ready to workshop, and kind of had a lot of questions about how they should be approaching their research as they're coming into their second year and have to start producing. And so this was a really productive discussion of basically how to make sure that your work is relevant in the international development community and how to kind of come up with those research questions. And that was a really nice, productive event. We also had some achievements. So a few of our members published World Bank impact blogs on the work that they had presented at INCH in previous years and had workshopped with us from the get-go. So this is work by Romina Tomei on how earlier bar closings affect fetal health in Brazil. And we also, they also showcased a blog by Nivedita Subramanian on Girl Bosses, the impact of information about supervisor and coworker gender on women's job search. So it was really exciting for INCH seeing some of the work that students presented really early on kind of make it to the global stage. So this is just really broadly what we've been working on. We've been increasingly working on student presentations and looking at workshopping student papers. So these flash research ideas, we work on conference prep when students are about to present at conferences. Some got canceled this semester, of course, but hopefully we can pick back up with that next year. And exchanging fieldwork advice, a lot of us do fieldwork. And we've seen increased attendance this year, which is really exciting, including great turnout when we moved online. So clearly this is not just about lunch, which is, good to know. And INCH facilities, and INCH facilitates the sharing of resources too. So we use our email listserv to communicate with each other about opportunities and resources and stuff like that. So it's been a nice community as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and also congratulations to you and your group. This is a very good example of ongoing collaboration with us, and we are very happy and proud of that. And again, we will have questions at the end of the last presentation, but I also like the fact that it's a very interdisciplinary group, and this is exactly what we are looking forward when we assess all your groups. And thank you for keeping the flame up. So now the last, Jack, are you?
Okay, can you see it okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. First off, I'd like to thank the center for giving us this opportunity to present what our groups have been working on. I am the administrative coordinator of the Ocean Policy Working Group. My name is Jack Einen. And to give a brief overview of our student organization, we're an interdisciplinary graduate and professional student working group whose mission is, on one hand, to create professional development opportunities for students interested in pursuing a marine career, but also, and I think more importantly, we're seeking to create learning opportunities for anyone passionate about the ocean or interested in learning more about ocean issues. And to that end, we try to take our cue from the environmental field more broadly and taking a very interdisciplinary approach to studying and understanding these ocean issues and how policy and governance might provide solutions. And so I've introduced myself. I'd also like to acknowledge other team members and the hard work they've put in. There's Katerina Martinez, our outreach coordinator, Sage Riddick, who puts on our lunchtime seminars. Megan Swanson did an incredible job with our symposium this year. Taylor Stoney is responsible for our biannual upwelling publication, and Lisa Miles organized our career trek this year, which unfortunately didn't happen in light of this pandemic. And excuse me, this is to provide a bit of an overview of our events and projects that we have going on. I'll go into more detail later, but we have a seminar series, which is typically either a breakfast chat or a lunch seminar with guest speakers. We do a career trek each year, which is typically to Washington, D.C. We have our annual symposium, and we have our biannual upwelling publication, and a sprinkling of other events here and there. As for our seminar series, our first speaker was Andrew Lewin, who's a very successful podcaster. He is a Canadian guy who started his career as a marine scientist and then transitioned into science communications. And his best known podcast is Speak Up for the Blue, which I would recommend as a very accessible podcast that touches on a wide variety of marine conservation issues. But he was extremely helpful in giving advice to students who are interested in science communication, and also for those students who are interested in starting their own podcasts. Next, we had a breakfast chat with Brianna Elliott, who's a current PhD student in marine science and conservation at the Nicholas School. She was also a master's student here, so she was very helpful in providing tips on how to maximize our time and what we get out of this master's program. And also she was a Knaus Marine Policy Fellow with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a very prestigious fellowship, and she was working mainly on research surrounding the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So it was great to hear her perspective on being in that fellowship position. We also had a breakfast chat with two other alumni, Allie Bowden, who's working as a sustainability project manager at UNC, and Willa Brooks, who's working as a data technician in a Duke faculty member, Javier Basurto's lab. And they're both very recent graduates, and once again, were very helpful in giving tips on how to navigate this program and get the most benefits out of it. Finally, this was one of my favorite seminars that we had this year. It was a virtual chat with Doug Rader, who's the chief ocean scientist at Environmental Defense Fund. And this was originally supposed to be in person, but with the pandemic, we transitioned online. And Environmental Defense Fund does a lot of research in ocean conservation globally. and Doug presented on a wide range of their research projects. One that I found particularly interesting was their climate modeling and predictions based on those models for fisheries and the implications for fisheries governance and management. He also talked about their research into designing more effective marine protected areas and used some case studies from Belize and the Humboldt Current regions. And then the career trek, as I mentioned, was canceled this year, unfortunately, but I still wanted to highlight the hard work that Lisa Miles put into this. And the event would have been a weekend in DC and meeting with several ocean policy facing organizations, including Pew Charitable Trusts, NOAA, the Ocean Conservancy, and Oceana. And there were several other events that were going to be in conjunction with this one event, like an alumni social hour. Hopefully we'll be able to work with these same organizations next year because I know we're all looking forward to this. And then as far as our annual symposium, it was a huge success. We partnered with Duke Water Network and Student Association of Wetland Scientists. And the topic of our symposium this year was the value of water. We had a very diverse array of speakers. Keynote speakers this year were Peg Brady, coordinator of NOAA Fisheries, and Emilio Tenuta, who's vice president of corporate sustainability at Ecolab. We also had speakers from blue tech investment firms. We had a speaker from Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, someone from MIT Materials Science Lab. And really the connecting thread of all these speakers was their ability to speak to their organization's valuation of water and water resources, and how they view risks to those resources, and different solutions that their organizations are bringing to face those problems. Overall, we had about 75 students there, students, faculty, and alumni, and I was pleased to see that there were students from NC State and UNC as well. It wasn't just a Duke event. And finally, that brings me to our Upwelling publication, which is one of my favorite projects that our group works on. And I'd also like to say thank you to Duke University Center for International and Global Studies for generously funding our publication costs for this. I see Upwelling as a great creative outlet for people to share their ocean-based research or their professional experience working around the ocean, or even just sharing their ocean-inspired art. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see some watercolors that were submitted by our friend B. Smith, which I think are great. And I also wanted to highlight this article that was submitted by two PhD students in marine science and conservation, Guillermo and Gabriela. And I wanted to point to this article they submitted because firstly, it touches on a very global issue, which is the governance of extractive industry in the high seas or international waters. And also because even for someone who's involved in this field at Duke, I learned a lot about the extent to which Duke researchers are informing UN delegations on this issue, the governance of the high seas. And also I was unaware of this initiative that's going on now called High Seas at Duke, which is trying to consolidate research across various schools, Sanford and Fuqua and the law school and the Nichols School and also the Nick Institute on this one issue governing the high seas. And so I just thought that was a good illustration of how Upwelling can allow students to share their research and let other students see it and potentially be a part of those projects.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack. This is also great. And when I said at the beginning, you are a new group, I know that you are probably our oldest standing group. So this is certainly a long-term collaboration. It certainly started before I was born. I'm joking. And but it's certainly all collaboration, and we also appreciate the fact that you have a very large portfolio of activities, including the publication that you mentioned. That not only it's the quality, it's a very high quality publication, but the images that are used for that publication are always wonderful. And the problem is that when I see those pictures, I wonder, I would like to be in the ocean right away. So at this point, thank you to all the groups. I do have some questions from the chat group. So I will start with the first two questions, and then I'll go back. At the end, I will ask a couple of questions that I didn't have time to do before. But so one question is to all groups, for all groups, is how does your group benefit from interdisciplinary membership? Can you provide an example? Some of you have already done that, but others have just mentioned that. But if you have a specific example, that would be great. Whoever, Felipe, would you like to start? Or?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think it's very useful because you might be missing some point. For instance, in our group, we had like a lot of people from political science and economists. They are very related, like fields, but I do believe that the way they think is very different. So, for instance, we were discussing some papers and in economy where we were just like trying to see what was the effect on employment, on all that kind of stuff. And people from political science would like try to see also some outcomes in, I don't know, like some things more related like to education and all that stuff, or labor, for instance. So I think it's very helpful in general.
Alex?
Yeah, actually, I have a pretty good one from my own because I was talking about kind of the mathematical issues associated with the large data sets that come with microbiome studies, and having biostatisticians attend the meetings, because I'm reading through some of these papers, and you know, as an engineer, I should know more math than probably what I do. But when they say things like, you know, inverse log ratios, or they're trying to, you know, get things from what they call n-dimensional space into a two-dimensional space, it's nice to have someone there that can translate these things for me. And so that's just, you know, one example of many. And then it goes the other way for biostatisticians when maybe they're reading through papers and they're like, you know, hey, it looks like they did, you know, a two-step PCR process. What does that mean? And having that biologist there that can kind of explain away, you know, this is what they did in this paper, or even if you're developing your own dissertation topic, you know, you want to use those best practice methods. And that's someone that I can just, through meeting them through Germ, email and reach out to very easily and get an answer right away.
Thank you. Laura, would you like to add something? Or?
Yeah, I think one thing about global health is that in itself, it's interdisciplinary. One way that we really brought that out, particularly through the conference, is by having you know, professionals and practitioners from different aspects who work you know, in policy. We even had interest from people in the Nicholas School, in the engineering. One way that we benefit from having interdisciplinary collaboration is really seeing how a lot of the conversations we have about colonial mindsets in global health can actually be applied to really any field that we talk about at Duke and beyond. So I think one way that that came out for us was through the conference and through engagement with members of different departments at Duke.
Thank you.
I guess I'd just like to add as well onto Laura's response is that because global health is made up of doctors, public health project managers, epidemiologists, you know, people working at the interface of research and practice a lot of times. Not many folks working in global health have been in social science oriented spaces where they have the opportunity to reflect on some of the broader like philosophical and theoretical impact of their actions. And so, you know, like a doctor who's been to medical school and has gone right into working in the field might not have had the time to sit and explore what are some of the downstream effects of them possibly working on an RCT, providing cervical cancer screening like Claire mentioned. So one of the things that we really wanted to create, like Laura said, was this space where individuals that might not have that opportunity to reflect and engage with theory could do so, and then kind of like make those inferences to their own practice. So that was one of our broader goals.
Thank you. Claire, would you like to add something?
Sure. I mean, the kind of fundamental ethos of INSHT is interdisciplinary. So there are just so many examples. A few that I can think of, one is in my own work. I work from a perspective of sociology, but I'm working on the same survey data set as a fellow student in our group who's in the economics department. And so we've been able to collaborate and like integrate the perspectives of migration, both from economics and sociology in our work. But not only that, I think we all come from, a lot of the work that we present is quantitative, but comes from different disciplinary perspectives. So we've been able to share readings, and I know some students have incorporated more political science into their work, for example, because they've been able to read books that were recommended to them from political scientists in the group that they might not have come across otherwise. So it's been really helpful.
Thank you. Jack?
Sure. Like I mentioned, in studying ocean policy and also environmental studies more broadly, taking an interdisciplinary approach is extremely important. So if you take something like fisheries management as an example, obviously it's invaluable to have scientists who have a good understanding of ecology and setting something like catch limits for fisheries. But you might also need to think about something like seafood markets or economic systems that are governing access or governing influencing fishing effort on those fisheries. You might benefit from having an engineer who can talk about impacts of potential gear restrictions or gear modifications. You might have, it might be incredibly helpful to have data scientists who can help with marine spatial planning or geographic information systems to implement successful policy. So you can definitely approach something like that from a variety of angles.
Thank you. One more question, then I have a couple of announcements to make at the end, so which will have a relationship with your work. But so has the current the COVID-19 crisis impacted your work? I know that you cannot eat in person, but it's beyond also the fact that you meet with other students. How do you plan to continue your working group experience in the summer, if you can, or next semester in case there are issues with meeting in person? Hopefully not, but just if you have discussed this with other students, or at least what. And the other thing is, which is it's interesting also, especially for some of the groups, as I mentioned, for germ, is probably have an impact on the type of interest that you are pursuing, at least in the future. Alex, would you like to start, just to change the order?
Yeah, so I kind of failed to mention this earlier, but we had planned on having a poster session next week with a lot of the germ members, and that is being moved digitally. I think that's a benefit of just having, Zoom. I don't think that it will impact too much of us with our group meeting, because we discuss a lot of papers. We can have virtual guest speakers and things like that. But then we can also get together and talk about how it's influenced our own personal research, like again, my example is I was 4 weeks into an 8-week mouse model when the campus shut down. But it is still in some ways continuing. So I think that, overall technology has helped a lot.
Thank you. Laura or Andrea, or your group?
Yeah, I think we'd only had one other event planned, which was a dinner to also talk about kind of next steps for our group. So that was one thing that has gotten, that has been affected, but we've been able to continue meeting remotely through Zoom. And actually with the pandemic, I think like I mentioned earlier, it's given us a chance to really apply what we talked about and what our takeaways from the conference in the context of the pandemic, and really think about when we talk about decolonizing global health, how can we apply these thoughts and can we apply these theories that we engage with in the conference now in the pandemic response, and also something that we are working on writing pieces over the summer that will hopefully get to publish, but also just thinking of, like I said, how do we imagine a future in global health now that we've gone through this historical monumental event? Once we're past the pandemic, how do we imagine global health so that it's more equitable, so that it is decolonized, so that it's repoliticized? So that's one way that the pandemic, I think it's added vigor to our cause, but also just giving us opportunities for how to apply what we've learned, further.
Yeah, I agree. Also, I think that the good thing is that the conference took place in January, so at least it's not affected by the.
Yes.
So that, but I totally agree that there is a momentum which you can capitalize on, and it's always nice to be ready when something like this happen, because you can not only continue your research but show how relevant and timely what you have been working, studying for a long time is. Claire, would you like to say something about your group?
Sure, really quickly. We have moved for the past couple of weeks to meeting online on Zoom and doing kind of group discussions there. And that's been working really well. We've had really good attendance. So I think if we have to continue social distancing, especially in the fall, we could pretty feasibly move to Zoom, which is good news.
Thank you. Jack?
Sure. Just a side note, this is reminding me of how Doug Rader, who I mentioned we had a seminar with, was speaking about how 2020 was referred to as the year of the ocean because there are 4 major UN or FAO conferences focused specifically on ocean sustainable development goals. And so there's a lot of uncertainty now as to when and if those will be rescheduled, and if we will be able to maintain, I guess, political will or momentum surrounding those events. But as for our own things, we had success in having that seminar online, and I think we are continuing to look for opportunities to have more speakers that we can interface with online. We'll likely have a couple talks with faculty later this semester. And we also are continuing to talk with the organizations we had organized our career trek with, because I know we were all looking forward to that, and are eager to find a time to reschedule those visits.
Sure. Now, I understand also for some of you as researchers, certainly not being able to access the labs, and or in this case, the lab in Beaufort has an impact, but hopefully that is going to be over. And Felipe, last comment on this.
Yeah, sure. So I think at social science, there are like a lot of projects that have like a lot of field works. And since like with this new situation, in our particular case, for most of us, like we were gonna do a field trip to Pakistan like this summer, but it got canceled because of the situation. So I think like these kind of projects that have like field work, it's a challenge, right, to how to rethink like these kind of projects and also the funding for these projects. However, I think, as Alex said, technologies will help a lot in some dimensions because there's like a lot of like data online.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody, and hopefully we'll see you soon, and let us know how you're doing, and have a great summer. Thank you.